The first real snowfall of the season had just blanketed the neighborhood, turning the streets into a white wonderland. My kids had been begging all morning to build a snowman, so after breakfast we bundled up in layers, grabbed the carrot, scarf, and old hat and headed outside. The air was crisp, our laughter carried through the cul-de-sac, and in no time we had rolled 3 giant snowballs, stacking them one on top of the other. The finishing touches made it perfect, a smiling snowman that stood proudly at the edge of our yard, facing the street as if welcoming anyone who passed by. It was simple, harmless, and brought us nothing but joy. But that joy didn't last long. Just as we were brushing snow off our gloves, the rumble of Karen's SUV pulled up in front of our house. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, had an expression that could freeze water faster than the weather. She stepped out, clutching her clipboard like it was a sword. "This is against HOA regulations," she announced, pointing at the snowman as if it were a crime scene. "Seasonal decorations must adhere to the neighborhood's aesthetic guidelines. This is unsightly." My kids stared in confusion, their mittens still clutching clumps of snow. I tried to reason with her. "Karen, it's just a snowman. It's winter. It'll melt in a few days." But she wasn't interested in compromise. With a huff, she marched right up to our snowman, lifted her boot, and kicked the bottom sphere so hard the whole thing toppled over. The carrot nose rolled into the street, and the scarf landed in a heap of snow. My kids gasped, and one of them started to cry. I felt a rush of anger, but Karen just dusted off her gloves as if she had done the community a service. "Rules are rules," she snapped before climbing back into her car and driving away. The SUV's tires spit slush as if punctuating her cruelty. I knelt down beside my kids, brushing the tears off their cheeks. "We'll build it again," I promised, though inside I was seething. What kind of person destroys a child's snowman over imaginary rules? As I gathered up the carrot and scarf, I made a silent vow. If Karen thought this was the end of it, she had no idea who she was dealing with. This was just the beginning. The next morning, the kids and I were back outside, determined to rebuild what Karen had destroyed. If she thought one tantrum was enough to stop us, she was sorely mistaken. We rolled the snow bigger this time, packing it tighter so it wouldn't collapse as easily. The kids added 2 stick arms, a crooked smile with pebbles, and even insisted on giving him sunglasses. He looked like a snowman with attitude, and when we stepped back, we laughed proudly at our creation. For a brief moment, the yard felt whole again. By the afternoon, though, Karen reappeared. She didn't bother parking neatly. She pulled right up to the curb like a sheriff about to enforce justice. I watched her march across the snow, her boots crunching with each angry step. Without a word, she shoved the top of the snowman until it slid off, smashing into the ground. Then she snapped the stick arms in half and tossed them into our driveway. "I told you once," she barked. "Snow figures are not permitted." And with that, she left again, leaving behind 2 stunned children and 1 fuming parent. We built it again the following day, this time with even more flair. My daughter tied one of her favorite ribbons around the snowman's neck, and my son stuck a plastic toy sword in his stick hand. It wasn't just a snowman anymore, it was our act of defiance. We named him Sir Frost. But once again, Karen couldn't resist. She came out at dusk, clutching her clipboard, and stomped Sir Frost into slush right in front of us. My daughter yelled, "You're mean." But Karen only replied, "Rules are rules," before disappearing into her house. 4th and 5th snowmen became a neighborhood spectacle. Other families started watching from their windows as my kids and I rebuilt, each version more creative than the last one with a cowboy hat, another with Christmas lights strung around it. Every time Karen destroyed it. Every time she grew more unhinged, her face redder, her voice shriller. People whispered, neighbors muttered, and cars slowed to stare at the bizarre battle happening on our lawn by the fifth demolition. The snow wasn't the only thing cracking. Karen's mask of authority was slipping. Her obsession with our snowman had become the talk of the street. What she didn't realize was that with every stomp of her boots, she wasn't just crushing snow, she was burying herself deeper into the hole. I was about to dig for her by the time Karen demolished the fifth snowman. I knew this was no longer about snow. This was about power, control, and her desperate need to dominate the neighborhood. The kids were exhausted from rebuilding, their joy dampened by her cruelty, and I couldn't stand watching her trample on something so innocent any longer. If Karen wanted a battle, then I was going to fight it in a way she'd never expect. Not with snow, but with truth. That night, after tucking the kids into bed, I sat down at my computer and started digging. I pulled up the HOA's public records, financial filings, and meeting minutes. It didn't take long before strange patterns began to appear. Expenses didn't line up. Money allocated for neighborhood maintenance seemed to vanish into miscellaneous fees. Contractors hired to fix sidewalks or landscaping all traced back to companies owned by Karen's relatives. The deeper I went, the worse it looked. She wasn't just bossy, she was stealing from her neighbors under the guise of HOA authority. I began documenting everything, saving files, screenshots, and receipts. The next step was talking to my neighbors. At first, they were hesitant, afraid of retaliation from Karen, but once I showed them the evidence, their hesitance turned to outrage. One neighbor admitted Karen had fined him for having a garden gnome. Another said she charged him for unauthorized decorations during Christmas. All those petty rules suddenly made sense. They weren't about aesthetics. They were about Karen patting her pocketbook. With the neighborhood on my side, I took the evidence to the state's HOA regulatory office and filed an official complaint. Then, to make sure Karen couldn't wiggle out quietly, I shared the information with a local journalist who had been covering shady HOA practices in the county. Within days, an investigation was launched. Karen, of course, tried to deny everything. She claimed she was upholding community values, but the evidence was undeniable. Checks, fake invoices, and her own signature tied her to the scheme. Watching her crumble in front of investigators was almost as satisfying as watching my kids laugh while rolling snow. It was no longer just about a snowman. Karen had unleashed a storm, and I had learned how to turn it back on her. The revenge wasn't loud or destructive, it was patient, methodical, and devastating. The snowman wars were nothing compared to what was about to come next. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within weeks, auditors tore through Karen's carefully crafted facade of authority and found a mountain of fraud underneath. She had been double charging homeowners for services that were never provided, funneling money into shell companies, and even using HOA funds to renovate her own house. What started as whispers among neighbors exploded into full-blown outrage. Letters from the state demanded explanations, court summons followed soon after, and suddenly the woman who once strutted around with her clipboard could barely step outside. Without a crowd of angry residents staring her down, Karen tried to rally support, but it was too late. The same people she had fined for holiday lights, garden decorations, or minor lawn violations now had proof of her corruption. The neighborhood turned on her like wolves. One by one, homeowners stopped paying HOA dues, citing the ongoing investigation. With her cash flow cut off and legal fees piling up, Karen's empire began to collapse. When the lawsuits hit, they came like an avalanche. Several neighbors banded together to file a class action suit for restitution. The state froze her accounts while investigators tracked every fraudulent transaction. Even the companies tied to her family were subpoenaed. The HOA, Once her pride and joy was formally dissolved under state order, its assets seized. The woman, who once boasted about her power to keep the community beautiful, now stood bankrupt. Humiliated and powerless. The sweetest part came one quiet morning, weeks after the dust settled. The kids and I walked out into the yard with fresh snow covering the ground. This time, no SUV pulled up, no clipboard waved, no shrill voice demanding compliance. Together, we built the biggest snowman yet towering, round, and decorated with colorful scarves and hats donated by neighbors who had all come to watch. Laughter and cheers echoed down the street as our snowman became a symbol of victory, not just for us, but for everyone Karen had bullied. As I stepped back, watching my kids smile proudly beside their masterpiece, I realized Karen had lost more than money or titles. She had lost the very respect she had craved. Her empire was gone, buried in the snow she once tried to control. And standing tall in our yard was proof that sometimes the simplest revenge is also the most powerful. The snowman remained untouched until spring, a monument to justice and the end of Karen's reign.